The Last Guardian. The library was closing for the night. The creak of the door lock echoed through the empty hall, where a warm silence still lingered between the shelves, filled with the scent of paper, lacquer, and something faintly bitter, oldness. Elizabeth Harper took off her glasses, wiped the lenses, and for a moment let her gaze rest on the empty chairs in the reading room. She liked this last minute before leaving, when the books seemed to stop pretending, when stories, freed from readers' eyes, could exhale softly, be just books, or something more. She wasn't in a hurry. Going home felt heavier lately. It was too quiet there, the kind of silence where every sound echoed with memory. It had been a year since her niece, who had lived with her after the death of her sister, had left for university. Since then, the house felt less like a place and more like an absence, the absence of someone who once laughed, slammed doors, asked to be read to aloud. The emptiness wasn't physical. It rang. Elizabeth walked to the window to make sure everyone had left, but her eyes caught on something forgotten. An open book had been left on the windowsill. Someone had left it spread wide, despite the neatly posted signs around the room, "Please, close books after reading." She shrugged and approached. A dark blue volume with no title. A classic cloth-bound cover, worn at the corners. Inside, neat, aged print, slightly faded over time. She skimmed through the pages and frowned. The numbering went from 311, 312, and straight to 314. Page 313 was missing. She carefully touched the spine. No signs of tearing, no rips, no folds, as if the page had never existed. And yet, the gap in the text was obvious. The final sentence on page 312 cut off mid-thought, and 314 began a new paragraph, as if someone had tried to continue but didn't know where to start. Still, that wasn't the most disturbing part. When Elizabeth ran her finger along the inner edge, her skin met slight resistance, as if something else was between the pages. Air? Or breath? She leaned closer. Where page 313 should have been, for a split second, just a flicker of memory, she thought she saw a familiar handwriting, her mother's, sharp, precise, with that slightly curling T. Just one word. Perhaps her name. But then her eyes blinked, and it was gone. Only a clean break. Only silence. She shut the book abruptly. The window above the sill was slightly open. The wind rustled the pages, but the book remained closed. Elizabeth looked at it once more, and for the first time in many years, she felt the library didn't want her to leave. At first, no one connected it to the library. Maya Shevchuk, 12 years old, vanished on her way home from school. She was last seen in the reading room, choosing between Through the Looking Glass and a collection of Ukrainian folk tales. Her bicycle remained leaning against the railing outside. The police searched the building and reviewed the security footage. Maya entered, but never came out, as if she had dissolved between the shelves. Later, Elizabeth found a book in the return drop box with a child's drawing tucked inside, in pencil, sketched across a page from the fairy tale, a creature, not an animal, not a human, something elongated, with hollow eye sockets and fingers fused into ribbon-like shapes. Beneath it, a caption, "It calls to me, but only when no one is reading." A week later, Professor Undrasev disappeared. A widower, a historian who had worked in the archive his entire life. He came in nearly every day and always returned books on time. That day, he was studying a volume of Slavic myths, a book Elizabeth had forgotten even existed in the catalog. An elderly man with a cane, he walked in slowly, and that was it. Gone without a trace. She later found a torn page tucked neatly between chapters in that same book. The handwriting was his. "If consciousness can be transferred into symbol,
then the body is merely a shell. The limit is not death, it is form.
The third was a French tourist. His name was never confirmed. Young, with a backpack and a camera. He had been browsing illustrated editions about serpents in mythology and lingered in the apocryphal section for a long time. He asked for Ukrainian translation, smiled, jotted something in a notebook, and vanished. Later, among his belongings, they found a guidebook on transcendental cults, bookmarked at the phrase, "Some doors open only inward." At first, Elizabeth tried to believe it was coincidence. Their small town in western Ukraine was not the kind of place where people frequently vanished. Still, people leave. They run away, start over, or end what they couldn't continue. But something wouldn't let her rest. The books. When she picked up the volumes the vanished had been reading, the pages felt alive, warmer than usual, damp almost, as if someone had held them too long. In the margins, strange scribbles appeared. Fragments of sentences, left hastily, it seemed. On the back of one page, the kind without text, someone had scratched, "I can't wake up anymore. If you're reading this, don't go deeper." Elizabeth put the book back, but her hand lingered on the spine. The letters on the cover seemed to tremble, like heat waves. And something tightened inside her. Guilt. Simple, unheroic guilt. She had been there when these people disappeared. One of them had passed just a few meters from her. One had smiled at her. One, perhaps, had asked for help, silently, with her eyes. She felt something rise within her. Not fear, but silence. A thick, heavy silence. Something was beginning. Or continuing. Only now did she notice. She descended into the library basement for the first time in years. The smell here was different, not of books, but of earth. Heavy, damp, like soaked memory. The ceiling lamp flickered before glowing with a dull yellow light. Between the shelves lay discarded things, old catalog drawers, wooden crates, scrolls, forgotten printing machines. But Elizabeth's eyes were drawn to the old safe in the corner, low, wide, wrapped in a rusted chain, with a padlock that had no key. She remembered it from childhood. Her mother had forbidden her from going near it, calling it a seal and saying the word like a spell. After her death, Elizabeth had inherited more than the library, also the recurring dreams in which someone whispered from beneath the earth, through the book spines. But there was another memory, one she'd buried. Once, only once, she had disobeyed. She was 16, found the hidden key, and opened the safe. Inside was a book, that book. But before she could touch it, her mother appeared. She didn't yell, didn't scold, just closed the cover gently and said, "If you read it before your time, the library will take from you what you love most." And then, more quietly, as if to herself, "I couldn't hold the story. I hope you can." They never spoke of it again, and Elizabeth never asked. She was afraid of the truth, especially if the truth included her. Now, the lock gave way too easily, as if it had been waiting. Inside, only one item, a manuscript in worn leather binding. No title, no author. On the first page, in tidy, catalog-like script, "You are the last. The boundary has weakened. When a reader stops observing and begins embodying, the story takes shape. They are searching for a conduit. You are the knot, the threshold, the guardian." Elizabeth stood there, clutching the manuscript, feeling all the things she had suppressed begin to rise.
Unsent letters, words she'd never spoken, dreams where her mother stood at the door and wouldn't let her in. The words didn't read like a message. They felt like a memory. Or a duty. Now she understood more. Not all books were alike. Some were ordinary. Others, core volumes. Those that housed entities not to be destroyed, but trapped inside loops, repetitions, unfinished stories. These books chose their readers, but only certain ones. Those with a high empathetic resonance, as her mother had called it. Readers who felt more than they understood. If such a reader touched a core volume, it awakened, and the thing inside looked for a path. Through dream, through memory, through metaphor, through the softest part of the soul. A guardian wasn't a warrior. A guardian was one who could keep the story untold, who could resist being pulled in, who could remain the border. All these years, Elizabeth had only maintained the system, catalogs, deadlines, renewals. But that wasn't her real task. That task had awoken. The library was no longer just a collection. It was a gate. And Elizabeth was the last who could close it.
They hadn't disappeared. They had become part of it. Elizabeth realized it slowly. First, as a feeling. Someone was watching her from inside the books, not with eyes, but with structure, as if the phrasing shifted in real time, as if the sentences weren't describing characters anymore, but speaking to her. And then she found the photo. An old album from the local history archive. Among the black and white images from the 1960s, a group photo. Librarians standing by the entrance. Fourth from the left, half-turned, glasses, narrow face. Professor Andrusev, 50 years ago. Her hand trembled. He wasn't the first, and perhaps not the last. These people hadn't disappeared. They had been written in, woven into the stories, transformed from living individuals into narrative beings. Not fictional, once real, now rewritten. And with each transformation, the entities grew stronger. She called them conduits, but later she realized not everyone became one. Only those who returned to the book 3 times. The first time, curiosity. The second, interest. The third, need. That third visit was when the book began to respond, when it invited. Repetition was the ritual, the cycle, the trap, and the path. She checked the records. It matched. Maya, the professor, the tourist. Each of them had chosen their chosen book 3 times. The intervals between checkouts grew shorter. Compulsion. Pull.
But not all gave in. One woman stopped after the second time. She later confessed she dreamt of a voice in the book, begging her to continue the story and simultaneously begging her not to. And the professor? He may have resisted until the end. In the volume he held the day he vanished, tiny handwritten notes were hidden in the margins. At first glance, gibberish, but on closer reading, clues, like broken fragments of a code. If they can't get out, become the way out. Reading backwards equals breaking the loop. Where there is no end, there is no door. Do not record your name, it anchors you. Elizabeth spent the whole night over those pages trying to reconstruct the pattern, and realized he had been trying to escape, or at least to warn. But maybe he went too far, or not far enough. Later, she held his book again, and at the slightest brush of her fingers, she felt it, a faint tremble. Not fear, recognition, as if someone very far away had heard her.
the books began to change. At first, barely noticeable. Titles shifted slightly on the spines, as if the shelves rearranged themselves in the night and the light remembered them wrong. A poetry collection appeared in the criminal psychology section. Inside, no poems, just confessions, written in first person, in unfamiliar handwriting. Elizabeth was sure those pages hadn't existed before. But more alarming were the shelves themselves. They started to close in. Only in specific areas, the same zones where people had disappeared. The aisles narrowed. The bookshelves seemed to breathe, to pulse, like organic matter. These were infected sectors, loops, traps. Wander too deep, and you might not return. She tried mapping it, marked every zone where anomalies had occurred, and they all spiraled inward toward one central point, the cabinet in the basement. In the center, the book with no title. Some books were traps, localized, fragmented, but this one gathered them. It was the knot. It couldn't be burned, couldn't be torn. It didn't obey physics, and as far as she could tell, it still had no text, just blankness, waiting for a name. One morning she found a woman standing motionless between shelves, the same one who always borrowed romance novels. She stood holding a book against her chest, eyes wide open, as if reading something in the air, but the book was closed, tightly, as if it had already finished with her. "Ma'am?" she said. No reply. She walked closer. The woman dropped the book, recoiled, and screamed, not in pain, but in terror. At that moment, a shape emerged from the book, vague, flickering, like smoke in a shaft of sunlight. And for a heartbeat, just one, Elizabeth recognized it. Her own face. Or rather, part of it. Eyes full of grief. Lines she hadn't seen in a mirror for years. It was her shadow. What she had repressed. Guilt over her niece, over her mother, over those she had failed. The inner voice that whispered, "You knew," and said nothing. The thing vanished. The woman collapsed in tears. She was safe, but never returned to the library again. Elizabeth sat in her office for hours, the lights off, wondering, could there be another way? Could she seal the knot without stepping into it? Was there a ritual, a formula, a substitution? Could she pass the burden? But deep down, she already knew the answer. The hunger was growing. The entities no longer wanted a reader. They wanted a source, an echo, a final punctuation. The story demanded an ending, a closed loop, a sacrifice written willingly. And the book was still waiting.
She opened the reading hall earlier than usual, 5 in the morning. Outside, the fog still clung to the streets. The few passers-by looked like paper cutouts, characters yet to be written into the plot. In her hands, the book, that one, untitled, with a black cloth cover that absorbed light. It no longer breathed, no longer pulsed beneath her fingers. It simply waited. Elizabeth sat at the far table by the window, where the city was just beginning to wake. She had spent more hours in this room than in her own home. She'd seen students, elders, lovers, loners, watched the pages comfort them, wrap around them, distract them, or select them. She opened the book. Blank. Dense, pale pages, like snow before the first footprint. But she didn't begin writing. Something inside her resisted. Not fear, not fatigue. Doubt. What if there was another way? What if entering wasn't necessary? What if someone else could hold the boundary? A face came to mind. Marina, the intern from Kyiv. Young, sharp, attentive. She'd once stayed after hours to reshelf books in perfect order. That day the knot book had been in her hands.
Nothing happened, but now it might. Elizabeth stood, went to the basement, chose one of the infected volumes, the one that buzzed faintly, a book with low vibrations running through its spine. She placed it in a trash bin, carried it to the yard, and lit it on fire. The flames rose fast. The paper burned too quickly, as if what ignited wasn't matter, but memory. And almost immediately, something changed in the library.
The air thickened. Ancient shelves, the ones that had always creaked with age, trembled. A lamp flickered out in the far corner. Several books slid from their shelves, hitting the floor with a dull, wet sound. She had broken the balance. Tried to destroy the cage, and the entities rebelled. The hunger intensified. The library groaned. Elizabeth returned and at last understood. It had to be completed from within. Otherwise, everything outside would collapse. Resistance wouldn't stop it. The story demanded a sacrifice. Voluntary, conscious, singular. She took out a fountain pen, not a keyboard, not a ballpoint, only ink. Because the story demanded authenticity, the sacrifice had to be written in blood, if only metaphorically. She began with the date, then her name, then the line. This is my final entry and my choice. She wrote for a long time, unhurried, as if stitching something closed. She wrote about her mother, the voices, those who had vanished and those she remembered. Wrote about how books first comfort and then consume, how they become alive and how the living want a body. When she finished, the library grew impossibly quiet. No creaking, no wind beyond the windows. In that hush, she closed the book and held it to her chest and stood. She walked between the shelves into the deepest section where no one had read for years. With each step, the aisles transformed into trees, mirrors, shadows. She felt the paper unfolding inward, space turning into story. And when she crossed the final threshold, the book opened itself and the world closed.
The new librarian arrived in spring. Marina, 28, from Kyiv. She didn't know anyone in the town, but from her first day, it felt like the place had been waiting for her. Her file said, "Temporary placement, covering for absent staff." No return date was listed. She received the keys, the catalog ledger, a brief instruction sheet. The system is simple, patrons are calm, just make sure to air out the rooms each morning. No one spoke of Elizabeth. Only their voices paused, and their eyes held a quiet kind of respect. Marina adapted quickly. Morning tea, checkouts, scanning codes, everything ran smoothly until the strangeness began. Some books returned themselves to different sections, as if choosing their own spot. Some pages felt faintly warm to the touch. One boy asked why there were pencil notes in Legends of the Carpathians. Don't trust the voices that sound familiar. She checked. The page was blank. One night, while doing inventory, she heard it. Pages turning on their own. Shuff-shuff, shuff-shuff, from the far end of the room. She followed the sound. No one there, just an open book on a stand. Inside, ordinary text. Then, hidden between paragraphs, like invisible ink beginning to bloom. "I'm still here. As long as you read, the boundary holds. I was the professor. They don't let go easily. Maya drew me before she ever saw me. We're inside her, and she's inside us." Marina froze. The words didn't just read, they watched. But there was no threat in that gaze, only memory. She closed the book gently, brushed her hand over the cover, and whispered, "Thank you." She never questioned the library again. But sometimes, when the silence deepened, she could feel it, something breathing in the building. Not with lungs, but with words. Softly, between the lines. As if the library itself were alive, and someone was still standing guard. In the basement, in the farthest cabinet, beneath old index cards, rests one book with no title, still blank, for now.